Welcome to the presentation on defending principles. This is the introduction session and it is presented by Ian Barker, the Director of Coaching Education for the National Soccer Coaches Association of America. Ian is somewhat unique, having held leadership positions with US Youth Soccer and the NSCAA, and he has had extensive experience at youth and college levels. He coached for 21 seasons with the men's program at the University of Wisconsin and Macalester College before becoming the NSCAA's Director of Coaching Education in 2012. Ian was the Director of Coaching and Player Development for Minnesota Youth Soccer Association for 10 years and is the head coach of Region 2 Boys Olympic Development Program. His qualifications are extensive, and he holds the USSF A license, the NSCAA Premier Diploma, and the NSCAA's Master Coach Diploma. Welcome Ian to the presentation.
Thank you, David. Certainly thank you everybody who has chosen to be with us this evening, including our international guests. Just getting control of the presentation. There we go. Fantastic. So, again, thank you, David, and thank you to the audience, both domestic and international. When you look at this mugshot and you look at these four here, you may think we're auditioning for America's Most Wanted, but these are actually our presenters for the rest of the series. And the four gentlemen on the screen here all have extensive backgrounds in youth coaching and, interestingly, are all connected in some way or another to MLS programs, but not exclusively with the MLS Academy players, certainly with community development and player development in the broader communities around the Dynamo, Red Bulls, the Timbers, and with John again with the Timbers. So I'm very excited to have these gentlemen present for the rest of the webinar series, and they're very entertaining and a good group of guys. So I hope for those of you that have tuned in for all five, you'll really enjoy these guys, and certainly if I do a decent job tonight, I hope many more of you will sign up to enjoy Justin, Ricky, Mike, and John. So I will be covering principles of defending, and then from this presentation, my other presenters will go into more depth with some very specific detail. I think an interesting way to consider defending, if you're trying to sell it to your young players, if it's something you want to address in training, rather than stopping the other team scoring, it might be understood to be getting the ball back so we can have more possession and maybe score more goals ourselves. So defending is no longer the art of getting the ball away from the opponent and then kicking it out of bounds and waiting for a throw-in or a dead ball. It's definitely a lot more to do with dispossessing the opponent and then being ready to attack from it. So you will see the principles of defending laid out in a number of different resources in America and around the world, and you may see something slightly different than this list, but I think this list is fairly representative of what we think about when we think about principles of defending. Certainly, the notions of pressure would be really talking about the first individual is engagement with the ball and the opponent. Cover, we'd start thinking about additional players, trying to help the person who is most engaged with the ball from a defensive point of view. Balance, we're starting to think of subsequent layers of players, perhaps marking opponents and also marking space. And then compactness, control, and restraint would be bigger team issues for defending. So you can see kind of a progression there potentially of numbers. But I would argue you could work on all these principles more than adequately in a 4v4. So you certainly don't need to have 11 players on the field to teach team defending and team defending principles. And these are the five broad areas that I will cover this evening. So pressure, most commonly in our training sessions, we understand that to be getting somebody straight to the ball. And that certainly is a common understanding of what pressure may be. And to do that, we would probably look to give immediate chase once we've been dispossessed to the ball, and deny the opponent the chance to dribble, to shoot, to pass, or to get their head up. But we may also consider the notion of delaying, because sometimes we won't be able to necessarily win the ball right back, and we may be in a number situation that doesn't merit pressing the ball right away. So rather than the notion of low pressure, which tends to suggest we've all fallen asleep, I like to think of it as pressure, or we delay pressure, and we delay high pressure. So the notion here is that at some point we're going to go and win the ball, and we're going to do it with a purpose, but we aren't necessarily going to fly around at the ball all the time because the situation may not demand that, and we'll see some of our training activities. Just in terms of our bullets there, certainly this notion of immediate chase ties into the point of where we lose the ball, so that moment of transition. It's critical when we teach defending, which sometimes becomes very tactical in our thinking, that our players have good technical ability. They have good footwork, good body positioning, that they can tackle appropriately with good weight behind the ball, perhaps toe poke the ball away, occasionally slide tackle, which is an acquired skill that certainly older players might develop and train on. But technical ability should never be forgotten as the bedrock of everything that we do when we're talking about defending. Decision making, when we're talking about pressure, is pretty much a individual decision. What is the decision of the person who is either going to go challenge for the ball or perhaps wait for the ball to come to them or the opponent to come to them? And then as we layer in our notions of pressure, immediate chase, deny, delay, do we know where we are on the field, which would be very critical as we see in these activities? And then what communication are we receiving, and what communication are we giving by the way that we approach the ball and the type of pressure we apply to the ball and the opponent? Sometimes we can give a non-verbal cue by the way we shape to the ball. So moving on to our first set of activities. So this activity, I'll explain it to you just briefly here. We're focusing on this player primarily, the white defender. And what we have up here is we have 3 red players knocking the ball around, and at some point the red player in the middle will serve the ball into the space, and now we'll have 1, 2 red players attacking this white player. At the same time, the coach will call out a number. In this case, he's calling out 1, and 1 player will recover. So what you see is here we have 1, 2 defenders, but we have 2 attackers, and of course this defender is out of position. So in this particular scenario, if this player ran as fast as he or she could to put pressure on here, there's a very good chance the ball could be slipped to the open player and a goal would be scored. So in my opinion, the challenge for this player is to start closing some of the space, but to take up a position which would allow this player to recover. So in this particular case, this player's job, I've lost my red dot, but this player here, the white player, goal side, here we go, my dot came back, he would be looking to perhaps delay things to allow the recovery run. And now we see on the second slide, this recovery run has now occurred. And so now as this recovery run is happening, the first defender, the one who was goal side, can start applying more pressure to the ball. So now this becomes much more of a deny the dribble, deny penetration, because we have a great recovery run coming here to make this more of a 2 versus 2. And you can see this could be quite a dynamic and fun training session. And then the consequence now is that very good pressure by this player has disabled this player from playing forward, the red player. And so now the red player is caught turning backwards into the field. We've got great cover here, and so we've really taken away a potential goal-scoring opportunity by the intelligence of the first defender in terms of delaying their pressure to the ball and then subsequently denying penetration on the pass, dribble, or shot, and now making a nice little tight 1v1 here with this red player essentially out of the activity and this white player able to potentially support or cover here. So you can see, if you get the distances right in your setup, you can create some really good dynamics for how this activity might work. And then, of course, you just flip the players. So I really like this activity because it creates thinking, and it potentially, every time you do it, based on the positioning of the players, will throw up a different scenario for you as the coach to discuss. Now, what I'd like to remind you all, of course, is when you get this session in the printed form, all of these notes will be on it. So for those of you participating in the full program, you'll see this activity fully annotated in the manual that you receive at the end of the program. So that's sort of my idea for pressure, with the notion of immediate chase, delaying and then denying the action. So when we come to cover, and if you follow the attacking principles, you'll see that pressure lines up with penetration, cover lines up with support. We're really talking about the next defensive player who is trying to create more of a 2v1 situation around the ball, as opposed to leaving their teammate exposed in a 1 versus 1 duel. And so key considerations when we're talking about cover would certainly be depth, our position in relation to the ball and the goal, the opponent and our teammate. We want to make sure our distances and angles make sense for the situation, and of course there'll be a myriad of situations. Great opportunity for this player to verbally communicate with the person on the ball, because this player has a little bit less concern of the immediate issues surrounding the ball than the opponent, and he or she may be in a great position to give some guidance to that first defender. If cover is applied well, then we gain numerical advantages all around the field. And one of the key issues with cover is if the ball gets moved, if the person with the ball, the attacker, breaks down the first pressure, are we in a position to now step up and be the pressing player? So this ability to switch roles at speed is a key aspect of cover. And so here's an activity which I'm sure many of you will be practicing in some format, and I think this has a few nice wrinkles that you might enjoy. The activity works like this. We have 4 white players here on this rectangle, and for now we're going to let the white players stay outside the rectangle. They can't come in, and these 2 red defenders, they can't go out. So this will allow the whites a little bit of an opportunity to move the ball around, but they must move the ball around by passing it through the grid. And the challenge for our 2 red defenders now is working in tandem. Can they intercept these passes that are being played around the grid by the 4 white players? And the job for the reds is to intercept the pass and steal it, and the job for the whites is to complete a number of passes that you decide. And when they've done that, they will then play the ball to the far end, to their 5th player. And when that happens, this white player will come down the line, and then you'll have the same scenario here, and these 2 red players would go over and try to intercept on this side of the activity. So you can see there's a nice back and flow, and there's certainly a good degree of challenge for these 2 reds who are going to work very hard. Really importantly, as coaches, as we evolve our training, we may go to the level where these 4 whites are in the grid, and so now the reds can actually high press and potentially steal the ball as well as intercept it. But for now, I've just put these whites on the outside where they can't be tackled, as it were. And so what we've got now is the ball's gone down the other grid, but here this red player has managed to intercept this pass down the line. He and his partner have worked in tandem. They've probably tried to prevent this longer pass first and try to keep play in front of them. And when this dispossession occurs, the way the reds get to score a goal is they just dribble out of bounds. So if this red player wins it, he dribbles out of bounds. Rather than kicks it away or kicks it out, he dribbles it out, and then the 2 reds have been successful. And what we're looking here all the time is this relationship between these 2 reds. Are they able to stay together, communicate with each other, probably try to prevent, as a priority, the split pass, and try to keep play a little bit more predictable going around the corners of the grid, as it were. And here's our final wrinkle to the activity. So these two reds have been unsuccessful. They haven't dispossessed. The whites have played it down the other end, and now to give these two a break, we allow these two reds to come immediately into the field of play. And so now there's a little bit of speed of action. We've got some fresh legs defensively. These two guys are trying to work in tandem. They're starting to get to know each other. These might be your two centre backs. They might be your two central midfielders. And we have some other pairs ready to go here. And we would be talking all the time about communication, angles, depth, challenging for the ball, dropping off a little bit, and all aspects of a two-person defending protocol. And I think you could have a lot of fun with this activity. Two teams of 5, 6 players, and you could play this for a long time. One team is, of course, working on possession, which is great, and the other one is working on your focus, which would be tandem defending, preventing being split, perhaps preventing passes being played around them. So I like this activity a lot. I think it has some nice shape, and you can certainly increase the complexity by how you use the whites. Can they come into the grid? Could they have a touch limitation? You can really change this up to fit your player level and your personal preferences. So now we come to balance, which is a difficult thing sometimes for us as coaches to be completely comfortable with, and certainly for players. And this is where younger players start to become challenged a little bit more in understanding our defensive principles, because balance refers to players not immediately pressing the ball or covering, but are perhaps away from the action, the immediate action. And their responsibilities are both to be aware of where their opponents are, should they get the ball, but they're also having to think about space where perhaps a pass could be played. And so balance is now a little bit more abstract. It's not quite as clear what the player has to do because it's not get to the ball, follow the player. Indeed, if you've told your players that they have a particular person to be responsible for, and that person subs out and your player subs out with them, or that player goes to the bathroom and your player goes to the bathroom with them, then they haven't quite grasped the concept of balance. So balance is something that you can train in 3v3s, 4v4s. It requires a little bit of thought. It's a cognitive technique as well as a physical one. You have to be aware as a player of the immediate problems surrounding the ball and the goal, but also space. You have to be aware if there is good pressure on the ball, because if there's very good pressure on the ball, you might be able to get closer to the action. However, if there's very poor pressure on the ball, the players, the other players may have to spread out a little bit more, because the potential for the ball to be sprayed around the field by the opponent could be greater. So we have to be aware of whether we have effective pressure. And critically, and this is very critical with the notion of balance, is that we must be aware of both space and opponents. And we aren't necessarily going to mark opponents exclusively or space exclusively. And so this is now where technique and tactics, I think, really start to come in very critically in our defending principles, because players have to have positioning techniques. They have to have their head on a swivel. They have to have their body open to the action and open to the ball. They have to know that the ball is being effectively pressured and that there's good cover around the ball. But they have to make decisions now about where they position themselves should the ball be played somewhere else on the field. So balance is a really important part of group defending. But again, at the youth levels, we can do this with 3v3s and 4v4s. We don't need to have 22 players on the field. So here's an activity I really like. And bear with me a little bit here, because some of you may appreciate the complexity of this, and some of you may be looking for a little bit more explanation. So this activity is three grids. The red team is in a 2-2-1 formation, as opposed to the whites, who are in a 2-1-2 formation. So you'll see the teams are in slightly different formations, and that's there's a reason for that. The game works like this: that the goalkeepers start with the ball, and that's how the game starts, and the ball must go through each of the 3 grids. That's the game condition. Players are restricted to their grid, so the player stay in the grid, the ball must go through all 3 grids before it goes to the score. So the important challenge here for this white player is this. If he marks and gets tight to this red player in anticipation of the red player getting the ball, I would assume that the red team would immediately give the ball to this guy who would be unmarked, and the white player would be way too far away. So the challenge for this white player is to balance off the combined threat of this player and this player. So he's going to take up a position that kind of splits them a little bit. And then when this ball is played, and as this red player begins to move, he is now going to follow the action and put some pressure here. So this player has been balancing off the twin threat of both reds. And then when the ball is played forward, he has now become the player who's going to choose to pressure the ball. So this player has a very stressful situation here to balance off the threat of the 2 reds in the middle zone. Now what we see here is, and I think the image catches this quite well, the great pressure that he applied turned the red player back into the field and forced him to pass it to his teammate. While that's happening, this red player doesn't chase the ball because he's never going to get there in time. So what he takes now is he takes a recovery position and again tries to split the threat. He tries to balance off the threat. He's turned this player away, he's forced this pass, but he's recovered into a position to deny this pass from this player here. So this is very clever defending on the part of this white player because he's both marking space at times and then he's getting tight to the ball or intercepting the ball. So I think if you, as you begin to develop your understanding of notions of balance, you could see here how this would be a fantastic training game for this particular player. And certainly his 2 teammates behind him, the 2 whites, could be assisting in communicating with him and also starting to prepare should the ball get played into the final zone. And then if we look at this picture back the other way now, we work on the same principles, but we have the 2 players in here. And so now what they're trying to do is really protect the ball getting played into these 2 white players. So you'll see here this guy's kind of just caught in no man's land a little bit, but this player has been screening the pass into the middle zone, into the final zone, and as the whites have worked the ball out, he has stepped into the line of the pass and intercepted the pass, and then he's able to play it forward. So again, he hasn't got a man mark this player because perhaps if you hear the expression he got too tight, he may be guilty of letting this player exploit him in a very tight 1v1. So instead, he's kind of balanced off the threat of the long pass and also the potential of this player dribbling. And then we would hope at some point this player would get engaged a little bit more. But this player here has done a great job of balancing off the threat of penetration by this player into his 2 teammates. And what you can see from this activity is you could play it both ways and work on 2 central midfielders and then 1 central midfielder, or you could go exclusively one way or the other. So you've got some great opportunities here to explore this activity. Okay, now team compactness. This is beautifully articulated by a colleague of mine called John Bloom, the head coach of Ohio State University. And he talks about soccer being a game of space, and the job of the team in possession is to find the space, and the job of the team out of possession is to deny the space. So here you see the Italians kind of ganging up on a Spanish player, Iniesta. And so team compactness, defensive principle, is talking about keeping people close and around the ball. It's important then that we have team unity, and this is why I think it's critical that we train this in groups of 3 and 4 before we try and build up to 11v11. Being all together here is important, but if we don't put good pressure on the ball, then all the team unity in the world is a bit irrelevant if the opponent can pass or dribble or shoot the ball wherever they want to. Typically, as a team, we would move together in terms of compactness. And a really helpful trick when you're teaching players is to have them talk about left and right shoulder. And really all we mean by this is just take a look over your left and right shoulder to assess where you are on the field, where your teammates are, and where the opponents are. So this notion of just a quick look, left shoulder, right shoulder, is very effective when we're helping players remember their responsibilities in terms of team compactness. And so here's an activity which I thought was worth sharing with you. So what we've got is we've got a goalkeeper and 6 white players attacking, in this case, a big goal. This goal could be a target player. It could be any number of different types of goal. But I wouldn't have this as a goalkeeper. I would have this as a target player or a big goal that they've got to pass the ball into. And the job of the 6 Reds now is to deny that pass into this goal. And clearly, if they don't put pressure on the ball and they stay quite large, quite spread out as you see, it's going to be pretty easy at some point for this white player to either pass the ball into the goal or slip it to a player who will be able to play the ball. So I would argue that this team in red is not very compact yet. And they will almost certainly have the ball played behind them because they're not putting pressure on the ball here, and they've left big spaces all around the park. So as we move to the second part of this activity, the first key here is to get effective pressure to the ball. And you see that these players are now starting to move in. I'm going to guess that this player would be the best to apply pressure. And this player here would probably be the player coming in to provide cover. And then this player, this player, this player, and this player are starting to move and take up positions which balance off the threat of all of the other players and also make the team a lot more compact and tighter as a unit. And so now, for this white team to score, if you're following the diagram, you might see that they have to perhaps play back to the goalkeeper and then out to the space to come around. And if they were to do that, I think we'll all agree that the red team would be able to shift their position as a unit and defend it. So I like this image because I think it shows you how effective the red team can be if they work in unison. And here we see now that perhaps pressure wasn't quite effective. This player has been able to play this long diagonal pass, and congratulations to the white player for doing it. But what you start to see immediately as that ball is traveling, and this is critical, these players must make this adjustment as this ball is traveling. We've got a little bit of potential pressure coming from behind, maybe some immediate chase. We've got a recovery run in here. Looks like this one's going to recover a little bit deeper. We've got a guy going out to the ball. And I'm going to assume that these 3 players would be dragged, these 3 Reds would be dragged by the running of these 3, and again, keep our team compact as a unit. So when you're training this, you have to make sure that the red team can be somewhat successful by giving them some realistic challenges. You may give a couple more whites, put another couple of whites into the game to stress the reds a bit more. If you make the space too small, the reds will be successful just because the space is too small and the whites aren't very technically able. So it's very critical for you as the coach to identify when the reds are being successful because they're learning the habits and they're learning your ideas, or when they're just being successful by default. So managing your space is going to be unique to each and every individual one of you out there listening tonight. And then moving along, I think this is, again, it starts to get a bit theoretical, and you might not use this language of control and restraint with your players. You might use other words, other vocabulary that the players will understand. But this is the notion of team unity. When do we press? When do we drop off? It might tie into moments of the game. So perhaps it's at the end of the half, we're very tired, so we can't play that high-energy pressing game. We may be losing 1-0 with 5 minutes to go, so we have to be much more aggressive in our pursuit of the ball. So there's, I think, moments of the game, situations, and you can conjure these in training. You could, for example, just play a game and say, all right, one team is losing by a goal and there's 5 minutes to play, and just see how the 2 teams approach that situation, that moment. But that's control and restraint. The line of confrontation, that would refer to where you decide you're going to set up your team defensively. And in the modern game, if you watch senior soccer in the modern game, you'll see that teams tend to defend perhaps the top of the center circle in the opponent's half when the goalkeeper has the ball. So they already work on getting compact, and they decide that they're going to give up perhaps a third of the field and let the opponent come to them. And this is where this critical notion of delaying the pressure rather than low pressure comes to me. So when we press aggressively, but we may delay that pressure because it's not the right time, not the right area of the field. With control and restraint, there's requirements of individual discipline. So if you have one or two players that want to run around aggressively and the other 8 are trying to be perhaps a little bit more reserved and conservative and defend a bit deeper, your system will break down. So you need all of your players to be on the same page, and that's why it's very much a team tactic, something that you as a group of players and coaches need to be agreed upon. So here's an activity to work on this notion of control and restraint, and hopefully you'll like this one. So here we have a 4v4. The red team has 2 goals to attack, and they're wide goals, and the white team has this one big goal to attack. And we're going to put in a game condition for now that says every goal or the ball must be kept below head height. So we're not worrying about people chipping the ball over each other. We're going to keep the ball below head height, and we're going to say that to score a goal, you've got to be in the opponent's half. That could be a game condition. It doesn't have to be, but that might help us get this activity started. So with the white team in possession, the challenge for the red team is that this white team is going to want to attack centrally. So as a group, we are going to try to keep the action to the outside of the field. We're going to try and control and set up our defensive shape so that we keep the ball to this flank over here. And that is why these 2 players are making angled runs to try to keep action to this side, and then of course these 2 players will come over and help them with that. So we're setting up a defensive shape that says we're going to let you have the sideline, but we're not going to let you come back to the middle. And as we advance the slide now, the red team has been quite successful. They've kept this white player wide, and now the chances of scoring, the diagram is perhaps not ideal, but you can see that this white player here is quite a long way away from the center part of the field, and we'll probably either have to cross it, and now maybe we have some numbers up, or have to play backwards into the center of the park. So I would argue that the red team has done a good job of forcing the play wide and preventing the team penetrating down the middle of the field. And now they've intercepted the pass here, and they're in a good shape to play out and to attack in wide position. So they've defended the ball and forced it wide, and when they've won it back, they've been able to transition quickly into wide attacking spaces. Of course, you could flip this activity and work on the white team, because the white team's responsibility here when they lose it would be to try to force the play back to the center and force play into the middle of the field. And that would be quite interesting, because sometimes as coaches, we encourage the players to use exclusively the sideline as the help. But if I was the white team in this activity, I might want to force the ball into the middle of the field as a unit, because when we win it, we can counterattack centrally, and then we're not letting the red team get outside. So you could mess around with this activity in a number of ways, but I think you can see here how the team could work on control and restraint. And again, if a game condition says that the white team cannot score unless they're in the half, now the red team may set up a little bit deeper, give them a chance to get organized. If the white team can score from the half, then maybe the red team would set up a little bit higher. So again, manipulating some of the game variables will give you some great pictures and some great things to work on. And I just want to reiterate, all of these training sessions are very detailed, noted down with all the way the activity works, variables, things to coach, and all of that will be coming to you in the 40, 50-page manual that follows the program. So just clicking through here. Just very quickly, because I'm a little tight for time. Considerations, man-to-man or zonal, that's a question that I'm asked a lot. That seems to be a burning question for many youth coaches. And my response is this: if your team defends exclusively man-to-man, you will get undone. And if your team defends exclusively in a zone, it will get undone. So from my perspective, we're always looking to blend these concepts. If you think about defending a corner kick, player standing on the post, that's a zone. But you've probably got some other players marking jerseys around the field. So right on a corner kick, you're exhibiting man-to-man and zonal defending, and the same would apply around the field. The sweeper, maybe 15 years ago in American youth soccer, everybody played with a sweeper. And that was really just a kid who stayed 15, 20 yards deeper and kind of just kicked the ball away when it came to him or her. A sweeper is a little bit more of an evolved and sophisticated position now, but you do tend to see a lot more of our youth teams trying to play zonally. So, so that would be an important consideration. The modern goalkeeper is an important part of defending because he or she can potentially set up a little bit higher if they're good with their feet. In formations now, we start to have different numbers of lines, so that might be a consideration. And the 3 to 6 second effect is this notion that Barcelona taught us all, which is pressing the ball as soon as you lose it and going after the ball aggressively. So that's important. And then finally, just my little note there, defending in order to have the ball more, I think is critical. And so just to recap our principles again: pressure, immediate chase, deny, delay, cover, balance, compactness, control, restraint. Hopefully when you review this session in your own time, you can see some of these themes coming out in our training sessions, but these again are key principles I chose to focus on. And just a little bonus slide before I turn it back to David. Our U.S. men's national team will have to be defending in Brazil this summer. And so the good news is we have 2 world-class goalkeepers in Brad Guzan and Timmy Howard. I think any national team would be proud of them. We may be playing at the World Cup players who are not naturally defensive fullbacks. So we may be having some potential challenges at the fullback position because our current set of fullbacks are more attacking-minded players and perhaps not the most gifted individual defenders. But again, Coach Klinsmann is developing some different options. Centre-backs, there's some really good players to play centre-back for us. Matt Beasler from Kansas City is important because he's left-footed, which gives our team great balance. And we've got good size, height, experience in the centre-back position. Holding central midfielders, really important in the modern game. My personal favourite is Jermaine Jones. Certainly, I think Carl Beckerman of Real Salt Lake is a fantastic holding central midfielder. I saw him play live in the MLS Cup final and a wonderful player. So I think Coach Klinsmann has really good options in that holding central mid. And then defending from the front, that's going to depend on personnel. Altidore, Dempsey, possibly Donovan, possibly Zuzi. But it's also going to depend on whether we play with 2 front runners or 1 front runner, because 1 front runner maybe can only steer the opponent, where 2 front runners could potentially put pressure higher on the field. So some interesting considerations as we head into Brazil in 2014. But I ran a little bit over time. I apologize for that. You can tell I'm quite enthusiastic about my topic. And I'm going to turn it over to David now. And David, thanks for organizing the call tonight.
Well, thanks very much, Ian. That's set up very nicely for the next 3 presenters. Ian showed and displayed that information at the beginning of the webinar. When you receive an email from me tomorrow with the webinar recording, you will also receive the links to register if you're interested in the next 4 sessions, 3 presentations, and a review. Just a reminder that there is an opportunity if you're interested in having your club coaches participate in the series. We do offer special pricing for multiple coaches from the same club. As a participant in the series, you will receive 4 free complimentary copies of Soccer Coach Weekly. All the diagrams that you saw today come from that magazine. They are our partner with this webinar series, and that is available not only to the participant but also all the coaches in your club, and I certainly urge you to take advantage of that, and details will also be included in that follow-up email. Ian mentioned the magazine, the manual. The manual is a summary of all the sessions, all 23 color-copied sessions, each on one page, and then notes from the presentations themselves, and all of your questions with the follow-up answers. So the last manual we did, the Attacking Principles manual, ended up being a 40-page bumper edition of a manual that's a special edition only for those people participating in all 5 of the webinars. So let's go to some questions. Ian, the first question is about when is the youngest age group you can start teaching defending principles, and what principle would you start with? And that's from Sally.
That's a great question, Sally, and thank you. I would play highly dynamic little 1v1 battles. So I would set the kids up pretty much to start with just behind the small goals. So one team at each end. I would have all the balls somewhere in the middle of the park, and I'd roll the ball out and invite 2 players out to challenge for the ball. I would be able to perhaps favor one kid to the ball, so maybe one kid gets a little bit better chance to get it under control. And then the other player, of course, is now the defender. And you may start off with the kid just saying, I'm going to sit in front of the small goal, which is actually a pretty dominant strategy, but would be counterproductive. So we're going to say to that young player, we want you to get to the ball as quickly as possible and not let the other kid dribble it or pass it or shoot it. So we're not so worried necessarily about protecting the goal. We're more worried about getting to the ball and trying to dispossess them. And if you were really concerned about the kids defending the goal, you might put up 4 goals, 2 at each end, or you might say you've just got to dribble over an end line into a zone. So now the kids have to engage with the ball defensively. And what would you be talking about at that stage? Well, you'd just be talking, I think, about getting there quickly, trying to get the person's head down, and maybe trying to make the person dribble to the left or the right. So can we force them to go one way or the other? And then maybe when we tackle or try to dispossess it, can we tackle with our, not across our body, but with the foot closest to the ball, and tackle, I like to see the kids tackle with the inside of their foot initially with full weight behind the ball. So I wouldn't be allowing slide tackling, and I would try to stop them crossing their feet over. But I could see 8-year-olds having a really fine time playing 1v1s, and you would be able to get a few little pointers in about being the kid without the ball, trying to become the kid with the ball.
Just a reminder, please use this opportunity now to get your questions in. If we don't answer them now, we certainly include them in the manual, and with that, your name will be included in the manual attributed to the question. So let's take a question from Brian, and he asked, I believe this one probably relates to the first activity you did on pressure. Do you make coaching points in this activity about recovery runs?
That's a great question, and I think we want to discuss immediate chase as well. So if you think back to that first session where I had the one defender goal side being defending 2 attackers, and then we had that young player running backwards or running back. If he or she runs and chases the person with the ball, there's a very good chance they're only going to speed up the attack. So to the point of the question that Brian, I think, asked is the trick for that player is probably, can we get deep as quickly as possible? Can we get goal side, as it were? We might start to talk to them about shaping and curving their run to assist the first defender and maybe even create that cover situation and get the 2v1 going as part of that recovery. So to the answer to the question is yes, I would address recovery runs because it's part of this notion of immediate chase, and I would be happy with that. Just real quick, the questions, one of the nice things about the questions that you type in is that they will appear in the manual with a response from the person you posed them to. So it's quite nice because when you get the manual, you'll actually see your question in there with a hopefully somewhat intelligent response. So that's a nice feature of asking questions.
A question from Sophie. She asks, have you coached 1v1 defending using the FA's, I believe that's probably the English FA's, 5 downs, and do you think it's effective?
I have to apologize and say I'm not familiar with that protocol. But I will look it up, Sophie, and I will write a response to you on LinkedIn, I promise. So I apologize for being a little ignorant of that particular protocol.
A question from our colleague Chris Burton. This is the second series he sent one in, so I believe he's probably getting himself ready for one of the NSCAA Coaching Awards. He asks, are there any specific recommendations you have in terms of teaching proper defensive stance and footwork?
Yeah, I like to do shadow type activities, and the younger kids really enjoy these, but you also see senior players doing them. So you set up one child with the ball, and he or she is going to dribble down the field, and we might encourage them to manipulate the ball a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, kind of wiggle around a little bit. And the training is for the other child who is now going to be backpedaling, but trying to maintain a good distance to the person dribbling forward, and then changing their feet around as the player dribbles. So a nice rule of thumb is this sort of 45-degree angle. So help the children get into that 45-degree angle, and that's where the ball tends to be channeled. And then as they switch and angle the other way, then the opponent is encouraged to just dribble that way too. So I would do some shadowing and mirroring activities, and they're a lot of fun. And of course, when you've gone across the grid, you just turn the ball over, and now the two players switch responsibilities, and one backpedals and one dribbles forward. So I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Sophie's obviously keen on us answering her question, so she the 5 downs are shut down, slow down, sit down, stay down, and show down. So there's for your research, for your when you answer hers.
Okay, I've heard somebody try to explain these 5 S's. If they make sense to you and you can sell it to the kids, then I've got no problem with it. That might be a bit more than I could actually handle in terms of remembering all the S's. I might be more concerned about that than teaching the kids. But certainly, and seriously, what are we trying to do? We're trying to shut down the opponent. We're trying to deny them. We're trying to steal the ball. We might be trying to support the person or cover the person with the ball. So you could probably find different ways of explaining it. But I kind of understand where they're going, and that's fine. I think critical to defending these days, though, is intelligent dispossession of the ball with a view to then being the team in possession and keeping it. So if the 5 touchdown model applies to that, then I'd be in favor of it.
A question, I believe I can answer this one from Johans. He says, will the manual be available in PDF or in print or both? And he's actually joining us from Indonesia, and the answer is it will be in PDF format, so it will be emailed to you once it is ready. Let's take, why don't we take 2 more questions, and take one from Brooke. Ask, in the activity on balance, where there are 3 grids, are the players allowed to leave their zones, or do they need to stay in the assigned grids?
It's a good question, and I would say when you get the activity going, keep them in their zones, so that you keep that really nice, clear picture for yourself of the 2 versus 1, or the 1 versus 2, or whatever numbers you want in that middle zone, because that's a critical part of that training session. It is the relationship of the players in the middle zone in terms of balancing off the threat of the ball coming through that zone, be it with a longer pass or a dribble or a shot or whatever. So I would begin the activity and be pretty strict about staying in their own areas. Of course, if you've got a group of players where you want everybody to experience it, you just rotate them through the areas. As you get more sophisticated, and certainly perhaps even towards the end of training, then take the zonal condition out, and the only game condition is that every ball starts with the goalkeeper, and he or she tries to distribute from the back rather than punt it or kick it away. They're trying to build so that now the defensive team can get goal side and start to balance off the threats.
Let's take one more question, and it looks like you're going to have to block out your morning tomorrow because they're coming in thick and fast. And the question is from Sergei, asks, how can we get coaches to shy away from a sweeper and teach a flat 4 and individual responsibility?
Okay. Good question, Sergey, and this could be an hour-and-a-half webinar in of itself. So first off, if I may, I would try to disavow the notion of a flat 4. What you've got is you've got, I think what we're talking about obviously is more of a zonal type situation as opposed to one young child who's dropped all the way off. The reason the sweeper is popular, or used to be popular, is it's an extremely effective way of winning, or at least stopping the other team scoring, because you've got this kid 20 yards deep who just kicks the ball away. A very helpful way of training that out of the coach is to go and put one of your attackers and have them go and mark the sweeper, because it really messes up the defensive scheme now, because the sweeper is keeping everybody on side anyway. So I would actually go and mark the sweeper and make the field longer and bigger for my attacking team. That would be one way to do it. But on the other hand, on a more theoretical note, we're doing a tremendous disservice to a child who plays that somewhat unsophisticated sweeper, because you're simply saying to them, stand all the way back, and when the ball comes within your area, just get rid of it, get it as far away from that goal. So they're not engaged in the action at the same way as a midfielder is or another player, and you're probably limiting their technical choices to essentially hoofing the ball away. So I think I would talk to the coach on a theoretical basis, a developmental basis, and encourage them that this is not, it might be successful in a competitive environment. At the end of the day, they're under 8, under 10, so who's keeping score to that degree of, who's posting their win-loss record. And then the other part of it is you can actually undo it quite effectively if you train your attacking team to account for the sweeper and actually and gum up the system. So I think there's a couple of ways of fixing it.